Now, let's go back to domestic politics now. Victoria, as we know, faces a huge budget trouble with its debt, thanks to years of reckless spending from Labor. Now, it's gotten to the point, and I couldn't believe this when I read it this morning in the Nine newspapers, where even essential services are being slugged with huge funding cuts in an effort to reduce spending. Just yesterday, and you won't believe this around the rest of the country, the Victorian Health Minister announced a strict new health funding regime where hospitals will not have their budgets topped up if they fall into the red. It's staggering. As a result, two major hospitals imposed immediate hiring freezes to cut costs. Hospitals we're talking about here. We're not talking about, the arts centre. This is hospitals. But it gets worse. Today it's been revealed that staff at three major hospitals have been told to help cut spending by turning the lights off each time they leave a room. Joining me now is the Shadow Treasurer in Victoria, Brad Rosewell. How'd we get here?
Well, we've got here, Steve, after 10 years of Labor and 10 Labor budgets. And, frankly, people say to me, yes, our state's heading to $188 billion worth of debt, but what does that actually mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. It means that essential surgeries are going to be delayed. It means that the staff that we desperately need in our hospitals to keep those hospitals running and to keep Victorians safe and well are going to be frozen. This is the state of things in Victoria at the hands of Labor after 10 years.
Because under the last period of Daniel Andrews as Premier and in the beginning of the Allen government, I think what they conned the public in around that election time was to don't worry about debt. Debt's something that we worried about in the past. We don't have to worry about debt now. But everyone knew that eventually the problems were going to come home to roost.
But, Steve, he didn't actually con the Victorian people. Labor lied to the Victorian people. He said to the Victorian people ahead of the last state election that they could have it all. They could have a big building project, they could have all the major infrastructure projects, and they could have a world-class healthcare system. Well, we now know, with hospital CEOs facing these massive budget cuts, with Victorian patients' health and health outcomes being, put on the line, that is simply not true. Labor
How embarrassed
lied.
would you be to be a treasurer of a government that was telling people to turn the lights off in a hospital to save 50 cents on a power bill?
But that's the point. That's the extent of it. That is what 10 years of Labor and 10 Labor budgets actually mean. That's what $188 billion worth of debt means. That means that's what $26 million of daily interest payments.
Where's your opposite number? I haven't seen Tim Pallas for weeks.
Yeah, well, invite him on, Steve, and see whether he accepts.
Well, I doubt he'll come. But, I mean, at some point, you're going to get the place crumbling. I mean, I've written in recent weeks about how no one cleans up graffiti anymore. My column in the paper today talks about how no one pays for public transport fares. The place is decaying before our very eyes.
And I make the point time and time again, we've still got 2 and a bit years of this in Victoria, and I pity the Victorian people, but I say to them, hope is coming in November 2026. There's an opportunity to change the way we do things and the way we do business in this state. And I'm just sorry to say that they've got a couple of years before that change comes.
The other development here, the Allen government's now so desperate for cash that we read this week that the cost of dying is set to skyrocket. Now, I ran a campaign years ago against death taxes. The Victorian Labor government's planning to slug families with fee hikes of up to, if this goes through, 650% to process your will. In other words, it's a death tax by stealth. I mean, that is...
So up until this point, Steve, there used to be two things certain in life, death and taxes. And now under Labor, we can add a third, being death taxes. This isn't death taxes by stealth. This is death taxes full frontal. The state Labor government is so desperate in this state to pay off their debt, a debt that they have ratcheted up over the last 10 years. Up until a couple of days ago, they used to just reach into your back pocket, Steve. Now they are reaching into open graves to try and sort out the mess that they've created over the last 10 years.
Is the problem for you, though, and I've asked you this question before, that when they do all of these things to try and reduce that crippling debt, once you get elected, if elected, you can't undo all this?
Well,
will you undo the death tax?
The first thing we're going to be doing is running a darn hard campaign to get Labor not to do it in the first place. Because, as I said, there's a bit of time, more than 2 years between now and the next state election. And, that's an opportunity.
Melbourne might be unrecognisable within 2.5 years.
Well, it probably will be. It probably will be. And, the government is just so darn set on delivering a suburban rail loop, a train line between Cheltenham and Box Hill that no one ever asked for, that we've got, death taxes being considered, that we've got a health system that's in absolute and utter crisis, not just in metropolitan Melbourne, but right around the state.
Talking about train lines, the airport rail train line was again back in the news. This so-called independent report into whether it should be above ground or below ground released today. The government won't release the full report. Federal Minister was on radio this afternoon saying, oh, well, there's not much we can do about it. It's got a private lease out at that airport. This thing's never going to be built.
Well, the federal government did appoint, in their view, an independent mediator, but the bloke wasn't independent, Steve. I mean, let's be frank about that. The same bloke who the federal Labor government appointed as a mediator is working for the state Labor government on the suburban rail loop project.
So is that independent?
Well, it's not independent, Steve, and that's the point. Now, usually what a mediator does, Steve, is that the mediator comes in and negotiates an outcome.
It gets a solution.
But at the end of this, Steve, you've still got the airport saying we want something underground. You've still got the state government saying we want something above ground. And you're absolutely right. The people who are missing out here are Victorians. Frankly, from my perspective, I don't care whether it's above ground or underground. I just think the suburban rail loop should be shelved and we should be prioritising airport rail. It's pretty simple.
Well said. Brad Roosevelt, thank you very much for your time.